for many folks who are in that founder's journey, who are on that entrepreneurial endeavor, there's this temptation to kind of put everything on hold until we get to the next level. And there's nothing great about the next level, right? Every bit of greatness you can achieve, you can only access right here in the moment. Every bit of joy you'll experience will only ever happen in the present. And so take hold of it.
Step into the world of success with Your Brand Amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. I'm thrilled to have Scott Ritzheimer join me today on Your Brand Amplified, talking about how to scale as a founder, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. We're going to talk a little bit about his book, and you're also a podcast host with Secrets of the High Demand Coach. So thank you so much for being here today.
Okay, it's super exciting to be here. I love podcasting. I'm like as raging an introvert as you possibly can be, but this is just my cup of tea, sitting down, having a chat, helping founders to grow and scale and doing it a lot easier than, they're doing it otherwise is a total blast. So thanks for the privilege to be on the show.
Of course. This is something that I think a lot of people don't think about when they're starting, and then they're lost and trying to figure out, how do I scale? What's appropriate? When do I hire? Sometimes people then hire too fast, right? Or they do other things that are not going to help with their overall success. So I believe this is something, whatever, if you're nonprofit, for-profit, or somewhere in between, understanding this is something that you need to have baked in from the beginning. So I'm really interested, Scott, in hearing how you got your start and how you found your passion for helping founders scale.
Yeah, it was totally by accident. I needed a part-time job and got together with another founder who was helping businesses and nonprofits start. And about 3 months after I started, he sold the business. And to make a really long, painful story short, I watched that business be systematically but unintentionally destroyed. The new owners had taken it and they did everything that they could to try and make it work. They did everything that they thought was right, and everything that they did just didn't work out. And one of the things that I learned in that process was or that I saw in that process was that they had bought the company, but they didn't buy its biggest asset, which was the original founder. The company was still way too dependent on him for everything from the major sales functions to the major fulfillment functions and even the administration, bookkeeping, like all of that really centered on him. And so he had built a great company for so long as he was there. But the moment that he stepped out, the moment that the new ones came in, there just wasn't enough left to really sustain itself despite their efforts. So 18 months goes by. He had owner financed it. So it was really ugly. It was really bad. Everyone wanted it to work and it just didn't. And it was hard for everybody. I have the utmost respect for everyone who's part of it. They really, managed it as well as they can. But ultimately, the new owners called and said, hey, we've given it our best shot. It's not going to work. We're going to declare bankruptcy before it takes our other business under. Do you want the business back? If you do, you've got 24 hours to come in, get it, sign off, the dotted line, and it's yours. And so he jumps in a U-Haul to go up and get the assets of the company, which by this point is like 5 old broken computers and 3 office chairs with none of the padding left in the, it's just. But it was kind of like the blessing to give it another shot was really what was going on. And he called me and he said, hey, this is what's happened. I don't know if we can ever make it work, but would you help relaunch this business with me? That was September 2008. And so I say yes, not knowing that the first 6 months, stock markets was going to go down. I think it was 32% in 6 months, something like that. The world felt like it was on fire, and we had to find a way of making it work. And so we had that, in many ways, it was kind of a weird entrepreneurial journey because I got to see it not work first, but we were able to apply the lessons that we learned through that process and really do it the right way the next time around. And from there on, it was off to the races. I mean, there's lots of lessons learned, and we can unpack some of those. But over the course of 13 years running that business, we helped start over 20,000 different businesses and nonprofits. helped quite a number of them scale, some of the fastest growing organizations, both in the nonprofit and business world in the country. And it was really, really cool. So folks, anyone who's watching this on video is like, wait a second, this guy's 22 years old. Did he start this thing when he was 9? Like, how's that work? And I didn't start it when I was 9. I did start it when I was young. And one of the challenges of that, though, is, I mean, the first time I was in an executive team meeting, I was leading it. Right. And so many founders, this is the experience. We're walking this journey that we've just never been down before. Right. Most founders are not necessarily first time founders, but they are the first time at whatever level of success they're at right now. Right. And they're pioneering this journey in their life. And oftentimes, because it's their first, and because there's just not a lot of great content around the specific journey that founders walk, you can feel like you're doing it alone. I know I felt like every day we were kind of walking off the face of the map. We had an idea of what was behind us, but really had no idea what was in front of us. And for a while, that's really exhilarating. But when you start taking a few hits, you start taking a few losses, it gets a little scary, right? It gets a little isolating, and it can get really, really hard and challenging if you're not careful.
What are some of the biggest things that you attribute to helping 15,000 churches and nonprofits, right, scale to such high levels, but also at a less expensive price point than they might have thought they had to invest?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. We were able to provide what we provided about a fifth of the cost in the industry. And we did that through a whole series of ranges, but I'll get to, it had a really profound impact on our leadership, which I'll get to in a moment. But the way we were able to do that was through system and process. So we used these 4 different leadership styles: visionaries, operators, processors, and synergists. And I happen to be this kind of weird combination of visionary and processor. So I have like all the big ideas and then I over-engineer them to death. Yeah, that's my normal go-to. But in being able to see the world through both of those lenses and having the experience of not having systems the first time the business was sold, it really helped me to understand the value that systems could create. And so we were able to adopt some pretty effective systems quite early in the process relative to most companies. And that's what allowed us to basically routinize a lot of our service. Even though it was very customized, we could walk our new employees through a very specific process that they would do again and again and again. And because of that, we were able to do what usually took, the IRS estimate was it was about 160 hours to do the work that for the first part of our process. And we were able, through system and process and some wonderful people, get that down to about 2 hours of the client's time. That's all they had to take.
Wow.
And so not only were we doing it at a fifth of the cost, we were doing it at, an 80th of the amount of time they would have to spend doing it on their own. And the combination of that, creating a tremendous amount of value, doing it in a routine way, was really powerful and was really important to us. It was a missional thing for us to make sure that we could make the kind of service we offered accessible.
I used to have a PR firm. And when I started really looking at, my systems and processes, I had a person who was a process person. She was fantastic. But then we had every division create SOPs for when a client came in or for when it was time for them to do their workflow. I finally did a big spreadsheet that included, so I could see if these are the people who are on this account and this is how much I'm paying them, here's how much I really need to be charging my clients. And it really made a huge difference in my mindset because I'd started out very organically, just saying yes to people, bringing on more team members, but not looking at, that intersection. So I absolutely love what you're saying about systems and processes. I think if you don't have those, even for a podcast, then you're not going to go far. You're not going to have the success that you could have.
Yeah. And there's a right time and place for it, right? So if you work by yourself and you only ever plan to work by yourself, systems and processes can save you some time. But let's be honest, most people who are willing to go out and start their own thing aren't going to follow a system and process to save their soul, right? You can define it until you're blue in the face, but you're not actually going to use it. But if you want to do anything with anyone other than you, right, there is a simple, base level of system that's necessary to ensure that you're delivering consistent quality. And one of the big things that trips folks up, especially really talented entrepreneurs. I call them star players, right? Those folks who just crush it. They're great at sales, or they're great at consulting, or they're great at cutting hair, whatever it is, they're great at making a cup of coffee. One of the challenges that they face as they move, from one stage of the journey to the next, and they start having employees and they have to start managing them, is that they think that everyone around them is going to think and behave just like they do, right? They think that they're going to take ownership like they do. They think they're going to work as fast as they do. They think they're going to do it in the exact same way that they do, right? And they don't actually sit down and think about it. So I can't necessarily say they think about, but it's a thought that they have. It's kind of the prevailing assumption. And so I see this all the time. I did it myself before we really cracked the code on this. I remember waking up one morning, it was Monday, I was I don't want to do this again. It's I was what is wrong with these people? I'd love my business if it weren't for, and I love the people, but I don't like trying to work with these people. What's going on here? And there was just this frustration that I had because I didn't feel like my team was keeping up. I felt like I was having to hold their hands. I felt like, if it's to be, it's up to me, but there's not enough of me to go around. And so I'm a little burnout. I'm a little crispy, probably not at my best. I'm young and dumb to add to it. And I feel like there's this fundamental problem with the world, right? The people are just not going to cut it. And what the real problem was with me. It was that I needed to recognize that my role was not to be the best player anymore, right? It wasn't about me being able to consult with our clients the best anymore. I had to be the best at managing others to doing that effectively. Mm-hmm. And that move from being kind of that star player to being captain on the field is very challenging. Because how do you do it? You don't do it by just running in and saving the day. You don't, even though you have to do that for part of your job. You don't do it by just saying, hey, go get it done. You do it by sitting down and actually looking at, hey, how do I get this done? Mm-hmm. What is it about what I do that works? And how can I, codify that? And again, a very simple way, can fit on one piece of paper. Here's the process for doing it. And then how do I hold other people accountable to that? Right? And these are all basic skills of management. But I mean, you've probably had a lot of entrepreneurs on this show. I know you have, looking at your guest list, you work with a lot of them. How many entrepreneurs do you know that started their business to manage a handful of people?
Yeah.
It's no one, right? No one. And so we all reach this stage, what I call the reluctant manager. And you've got a really important decision to make at this stage. Do you have to have a business that is the size that demands that you have more than a handful of employees, right? Do you have a vision for your business that requires you to make it bigger than you can do with, an admin assistant or something like that? Right. If so, you've got to learn to manage. It is your job as founder and CEO at that stage to learn how to manage your team effectively. If you don't need to grow that much, you might have kind of outdone yourself. You might have hired too many people. And interestingly enough, kind of like on the plane, sometimes the nearest exit is behind you. There's a lot of folks who actually don't need to manage that level of complexity. They don't need to learn how to manage a whole team. They don't need to scale, right? They could actually go back to doing what they love, right? They could go back to, if you love cutting hair, then don't build a team of 50 people because you won't spend any time cutting hair, right? And so a lot of what I do when I'm working with founders at the very beginning is to get really clear on, do you have to grow? Do you have to scale? If not, can you find the contentment and joy and satisfaction that you're looking for doing whatever it is that your business does?
Yeah. Fantastic. Those are big questions, but they are the questions we need to ask. Most entrepreneurs get into their field because they really love what they're doing. Like you mentioned, cutting hair, baking cakes, podcasting, whatever it is, but that doesn't mean that we want to scale up that much.
Yeah.
Right. Or some people might want to, and they're like, I love this, but I also want to scale, or they find other ways to turn their passion into scalability.
Yes.
You were also going to school at the same time that you had the first company.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I initially went to ministry school right out of high school. I accidentally dropped out of high school. That's probably another story for another time, but landed in ministry school and was working in the ministry world, which is kind of why I was looking for a part-time job at the start of this whole story. And as I got into business, I realized I was tired of like on credit applications writing grade finished 11th, So it's like there's one way to solve that, and that's to go and actually do the work of getting at my bachelor's. So during all this, we had our first child and then our second child. My wife was going back to school. I was going back to school. We're scaling the business. We moved twice during that window. It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. But the only way that we're able to make that happen, this is kind of interesting for some folks that are listening, a lot of entrepreneurs are just not made for school, right? They're just two completely different. Let me say it the other way. A lot of schools are not made for entrepreneurs. Yeah. And so what we unknowingly chose to do was to go a slightly different route where we were able to test out, my wife and I were able to test out of most of our credits. So I was able to do 12 credits in a week as opposed to a semester by using this approach. So it's fascinating. There are other options out there. If you're a young person listening to this and you don't know that, formal college is the way to go, might not be a bad option because you can work a full-time job and do a full credit load that way. It's a pretty cool combination.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and that makes it easier for sure. So you sold the company, you started podcasting, you also had started your other company already, Scale Architects. So talk to us about Scale Architects a little bit more, and then what prompted you to become a podcaster and to write your book.
Yeah. So Scale Architects, there's a whole bunch of things that really led to that. But my goal, our mission at Scale Architects is to restore the nobility of work by helping founders build better businesses. And one of the things that I saw in our business was when I was healthy as a founder, when I knew what I needed to do and I was doing it well, the primary beneficiaries of that were actually my team and the folks that worked for us, and their families were secondary. And so in those times that I wasn't doing well, right, or as a leadership team we were struggling, they felt every bit of that we did. And so for me, I think that having walked that road and seeing the impact that I could make with my team, I wanted to walk alongside founders and help them make that impact with their team. I could reach a much bigger audience. Our Scale Architects could reach a much bigger audience with a much bigger impact that way. So that's what we do. We work with entrepreneurial organizations. We help them build really, really awesome businesses that are a joy to work in and a joy to own all at the same time. It's a lot of fun. So we do that. We do coaching, consulting, all of that. And in doing so, I started to come across, I did a lot of public speaking as well from platforms. And as I was traveling around speaking, I was telling stories of how I had had some really bad coaches as an entrepreneur, right? As we're going through this process, we lost well over $1 million following the well-intentioned but ill advice of coaches and consultants. We made the biggest wrong decisions on the advice of outside counsel than we did even on our own. Now, that's on us. We made those decisions, but it left me as an entrepreneur feeling like the coaching industry is useless. Like there's if we can't figure it out, then nobody can figure it out. And it wasn't actually until I met one of the gentlemen who was a guest on our podcast, episode 4. His name's Robert Mallon. He was the first real high caliber coach that I ever had the opportunity to interact with. And he completely transformed my understanding of what coaching could do. Changed my life, changed our business. At the same time, came across a dear, who's now a dear friend and mentor of mine, Les McEwen. He did the same thing. And in walking with those gentlemen through the transformation we were making at our business, I fell in love with what coaching and consulting could be. So I'm traveling around, fast forward, and I'm speaking on it, sharing some of the stories. And one of the most common things folks came up to me afterwards to say was, I've had a really bad experience with a coach as well. And it kind of surprised me. Like I thought it was like just I was bad at picking coaches or something, and that was part of it. But I realized I started asking these audiences, how many of you have had a coach as an entrepreneur? And 9 out of 10 hands go up most of the time, right? Most entrepreneurs have had or do have a coach. And I started asking a little bit later, how many of you have had a bad experience with a coach? And 9 out of the 10, 90% of those that had their hand up stayed with their hand up. True. And I realized there's something systemically wrong about this, right? There's just something fundamentally flawed in the way that we're approaching coaching and consulting, both from the entrepreneur's side of things and from the coach side of things. And so the heart and passion behind the Secrets of the High Demand Coach podcast is to go and find high demand coaches that I genuinely appreciate and have proven their ability time in and time out, And I introduced them to show, hey, this is what a great coach looks like. Right. So if the person that, you're talking to, that you happen to know, that you bump shoulders with, that coached a friend of a friend of a friend on Tuesday, if they don't talk and look like this, right, if they don't approach the world through the lens that's common among these great coaches, you might want to ask some more questions. Mm-hmm. And so in doing so, we've had just some fantastic guests on the show who've given us, we always could try and trick them into giving us their best secrets, and we don't have to trick them. They're genuinely kind in doing that. But we've really gotten some great feedback from both coaches who want to become better and from entrepreneurs who felt trapped and have finally been able to see, hey, there's a better way, and get a better understanding of what a great coach looks like.
Nice. And then your book, The Founder's Evolution, Conquering the Journey Every Founder Must Face. Mm-hmm. When did you decide to turn everything that you'd learned over the years, all of the different people and companies you'd helped, into the next phase, which is a book?
Yeah. So at Scale Architects, we use a couple of different models, primarily developed by the gentleman I mentioned earlier, Les McEwen. And what we do is help people navigate the different stages that organizations go through. They go through very different stages with very different challenges and very different strategies for success. And as I started implementing that, and I'm helping these organizations grow, I noticed that some folks who did the right things succeeded, and others who did the right things didn't. And that was very curious to me, right? So how is it that you can both do the same thing? One of you succeeds and one of you, they were both succeeding, but one of, they would take off. They would double or triple in a year's time, and others would just kind of continue growing by, 10, 15%. And what I realized was the primary difference between the two was not the things that need to happen, but the way that the founder CEO was showing up on a daily basis. Because, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. You know what I mean? Like, you can pretend to do a certain thing, right? You can add systems and processes, you can delegate. But if you're not really bought into that, if you don't really understand how your role has changed individually and personally as a founder, if you don't embrace that, including all the bits that means for you personally, right? It's a very, very personal journey. Then you're going to actively, if not knowingly, undermine the scalability of your organization. Mm. And so I started looking back at the thousands of founders that we had helped, and I started looking back at my own story, from an outside lens, right? I wasn't there anymore. I'd sold my company, and looked back at it, and I realized there were tons of people doing tons of things in tons of industries. Yet there was this thread, this one through line in every single one of the stories. And where folks succeeded, they followed that thread line. And where they failed, the vast majority of them had departed from it or stalled out in some part of it. And I realized, in the same way that there are stages for organizations, massively powerful concept, totally transformed my business, I also realized that there are stages that founders go through. And if we don't understand what those stages are, we have founder and CEO on our business card from day one, right? And we think that we just keep showing up and it keeps getting bigger and better. We're in for a very, very rude awakening. And so my goal with the book, it's called The Founder's Evolution, was to map out those 7 stages and to help founders understand what stage they're in. And then based on that, what are the 2 or 3 things that you need to do? Because it really does boil down that much. When you understand what, as founder, you're supposed to be doing in the stage that you're in right now to get to the next stage, it's actually only 2 or 3 things that you have to do really, really well. And you can tell the other side of that is that's 20 or 30 things you don't have to be doing well, right? There's so much that you can let go of. And so we not only outlined what the stages are, but we really dial in on what are those 2 or 3 things that you need to do right now. And how do you do them so that you can achieve greater success without all the hustle and stress?
Amazing. And I know you were mentioning that there is a quiz that comes with your book.
Yeah. So let's be honest, founders are people too, right? But one of the challenges with visionary founders is that they have what we call a very high squirrel factor, right? So there's, you have it. I have it too. Don't worry. You're sitting there listening to the podcast. It is life changing. He's like, man, like this guy, this lady knows everything about me. Like, I'm so excited. And then before you get to your destination, the next podcast comes on and you're like, this person knows everything about me. This is the greatest thing I've ever heard, right? And then you walk in through the door and you've got like this bag full of squirrels, that you're just you're walking around the office looking for eye contact. Anyone that you can share these podcasts you heard about. And you get in there, you can't find anyone. There's 5 things on your desk that you have to take care of. And it's like, oh, shoot, what are we going to do? And so while the book is intentionally written for founders, it's about half the length of a normal book. It's still, when you're down in it, especially if you're in stages 3 or 4, which are really tough stages for founders, you don't feel like you have time to sit back and smell the roses, right? You need answers. You need them quickly. And so we took the whole content of the book and boiled it down into just 10 questions. And in answering 10 questions, you can find out in less than 10 minutes exactly what stage you're in. And it's been a game changer for folks, right? Because it just takes all the guesswork out of the process and lets them focus on what they need to be doing right now.
Yeah. And speaking of that, what is the one thing that a founder must do?
Yeah. So one thing is, we've kind of alluded to it so far. It's a bit of a trick question. So the one thing is that there is no one thing, right? Depending on what stage you're in, that one thing changes. So the one thing, if I had to put it this way, the one thing that every founder must do is understand first what stage they're in. And from there, from that place of knowing where you are. So let me just take this a step back. Let's say we're in Kansas City and we want to get to Chicago, right? And we talk to somebody who is they're another founder. They've been to Chicago many, many times. And we say, how do you get to Chicago? And they say, well, I go west, right? Chicago's west. And you're like, great. And so you take off west. Well, where do you end up? You're in like Iowa, right? You go far enough, you're in like Denver. And you have to say, like, this is not Chicago. Like there's no mountains in Chicago. There's supposed to be big lakes. What's going on? What we fail to realize is the person we asked was in New York, right? So it's not that they lied to you. It's that when they go west from New York, they go to Chicago every time. And so we have this habit in the entrepreneurial world, particularly those who really want to learn or who are in masterminds or groups, or we've got a little, if we don't know what stage we're in and they don't know what stage we're in, then it's a little of the blind leading the blind kind of thing, right? And so they're like, you absolutely must go west. And you're like, great, I got it. I'm going west. And you end up far from where you're trying to be and frustrated because of it. So the number one thing that every founder must do is understand what stage they're in right now.
Yeah, fantastic. And I love the fact that you talked about founders not just being leaders, but also having to have management skills. And those are 2 very different skill sets sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
They really are. And a lot of folks will kind of position one as better than the other. And the reality of it is, one is not better than the other, but they happen sequentially, right? So every founder out of the gate actually has to do the first thing, which is they just have to be able to get the job done themselves, right? For the vast majority of founders. Now, if you start with a team of 30, that's a different thing, but that's not most founders' story, right? Most founders are starting with themselves, maybe a couple others, and they've got to learn to get it done. So you just have to learn the business of whatever it is that you do, plus all the stuff that goes with it. And then you move to a stage where you do have to learn to manage. You have to learn to manage effectively. Now, if you do that long enough and you build big enough, now you need other people who are managing, right? And when you have other managers and you have to manage managers, that's where we really start to step up into kind of a more formal capital L leadership. We have to have the ability to lead our managers well. And so it's not that leadership is better. It just happens after and on top of and in addition to management. They're both skill sets that we need. And there's a lot of leaders out there, especially the ones who write leadership books, who are terrible managers. And so because of that, there are a lot of founders who are being held back from the success that they want in their business because they're trying to be a leader and not be a manager. And if that's you, you're missing out on a tremendous amount of growth for a very small amount of effort.
When you think about scale, what is one thing that you see people do wrong?
Yeah, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but it's to think that scaling means doing more of what we do right now.
Yeah.
right? We tend to think of scale as like, hey, if I can make, $1 million on 20 customers, then and 5 employees, then I can make, 10 million on 200 customers and 50 employees. We think that it's just this straight line, direct number, and it never is. Every single person who's growing their business with that mentality will discover that your problems scale way faster than your profits, right? 100% of the time. And so we get to this point where those curves start to intersect and our profits going down, our problems are going up. We're working harder than ever. We're doing less of what we love to do than ever, right? People are fighting. It's messy. It's complex. You try stuff. It doesn't work, right? You wonder if you're failing as a founder. You wonder if this is as far as you can go. There's all this inner and outer turmoil going on. And it all stems from the fact that we think that all of the growth is a linear relationship, and it's just not. It's a series of, growth stages and then, compensatory stages or structural stages, right? And that cadence of growing and then standardizing and supporting, and then growing and then standardizing and supporting, that's where scale comes from. And it takes tension, it takes intentionality. And when you look at it, the route to scalability looks very, very different than the route to growth that you're used to. Not that the growth goes away, but that you have to adopt a new skill set to really achieve scale.
Nice. Well, I know we've covered a lot, and I want to leave a little bit of room for my listeners and viewers to listen to your podcast, buy your book, go to your website and see if this is something that they need in their businesses right now.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask if you have a verse or family motto or poem or any words that help you get through every day in your personal and professional lives.
That's a great one. One of the biggest things that I learned being a founder, particularly now coaching founders through the process, is we have this idea when we start that if I can get to X, I will have arrived. I will have succeeded, right? It could be $1 million, 10 million, 100 million. Doesn't matter what the number is. We all have a number, right? It might be revenue, it might be profit, it might be employees, it might be it doesn't matter there's a number on something, right? Whether you know it or not, it's there. And so we work and we drive and we sacrifice and we put everything else that we possibly can on hold until we get to that, knowing without a shadow of a doubt that our happiness sits on the other side, right? And that we'll find joy at that place, that we will have arrived. Mm-hmm. And without fail, we get there. And there's this moment of exhilaration, right? This is, we got across the finish line. And then without fail, there's like the deepest, darkest hole that we never knew existed, right? Waiting for us on the other side when we look up and see, wait a second, businesses get bigger, they don't get better, right? And so what happens is, and it breaks my heart, I work with all these founders now who have had just a tremendous amount of success. And I work with others who are trying to replicate that success, right? And the ones who've had that success, they just tell me, man, I wish it was like that again, right? I wish I could go back to those days. And the ones who are in those days are saying, man, I wish I could have that level of success. And we all want to be somewhere other than we are because we think that joy is there. And the reality of it is joy is not in a destination, right? There's pleasure that can come from a destination. Don't get me wrong. But it's in the pursuit, it's in the journey. And this really hit home for me. We had our first 2 kids, I mentioned earlier, when I was in my mid-20s. And the first couple of years of their life, as I loved them to pieces, both of our boys, but I really had no idea what to do with them. It's just kind of, you can't juggle them, you can't kick a ball and they don't kick it back. I mean, shame on them. No, I'm just kidding. But it was kind of like, I don't know what to do. I don't feel super equipped. Here, Mom, like you rock and roll with this. I'm for you. Give them back when they're 2-3 years old. We'll have a blast. And it was fine. We have a great relationship and everything, but we had about 10 years between our second child and our third, our daughter Isabel, and I experienced a whole lot of life during that time frame, right? And when she was really little, I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to do this the same way, right? Like I still have no idea what to do in the first couple of years, but I'm not going to let that take my joy. Right? I'm not going to let my own feelings of inadequacy or incompetence or being ill-equipped take any of that joy. And can I tell you, Annika, the amount of joy that I experienced over those 2 years, the number of nights I fell asleep with a book on my face, in her room, or, more joy in those 2 years than probably the 20 years before that. Just because I said yes, just because I embraced the journey. And so for many folks who are in that founder's journey, who are on that entrepreneurial endeavor, there's this temptation to kind of put everything on hold until we get to the next level. And there's nothing great about the next level, right? Every bit of greatness you can achieve, you can only access right here in the moment. Every bit of joy you'll experience will only ever happen in the present. And so take hold of it. And so if that sounds pie in the sky, it sounds ethereal, in the book for each of the stages, and the book's available for free, by the way. In the book, each of the stages, I actually take a moment just to say, hey, look around. This is what you can experience now that you won't get in any other stage. There's something very specific. There's a specific joy available in every stage, no matter how hard it is, that you will look back and wish you had one day. So you might as well enjoy it now.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you so much for being on the show, Scott. I've loved hearing your journey. It's very inspiring. I teach university, so I have a lot of students who listen, and they will absolutely be inspired by what you've put together and what you've learned.
Thank you. It was just a privilege being here. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you to everybody who's watching or listening to this episode. I'll be back again with another amazing guest to share their journey and some insightful tips to make your life and your business a little bit better every day. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbrandamplified.com.